The Sherman was not the best. It was not the most powerful. It was not the most armored. Yet it solved a problem the Germans never understood: how to win a war from the opposite side of an ocean. While Tigers became legend, the Sherman, simple, reliable, repairable, won. And the generals who commanded it knew this perfectly. In 1941, the Americans faced a logistical impossibility: engineer a tank that could fight 5,000 kilometers from home. Not 500 kilometers like the Germans. 5,000. One Sherman had to be designed for disassembly and loading onto cargo ships. It had to survive weeks at sea crossing the Atlantic. It had to arrive functional in Africa, Italy, France, Russia. It had to operate in deserts, jungles, mud, ice. It had to be repaired by ordinary mechanics with spare parts available in any warehouse. The Germans did not face this problem. A Tiger built in Berlin traveled a few hundred kilometers by rail to the front. If it broke down, a specialized factory was hours away. The Sherman had to function with 1/10 the technical support. So the Americans did the only thing they could: they simplified everything. The Sherman hull was wide and modular. The engine was not fused to the chassis. It was bolted directly, like a tractor engine. If the engine failed in France, the maintenance crew executed 3 steps. First, remove the engine, 2 or 3 hours. Second, install a new one from a local warehouse. Third, return the tank to combat. A Tiger required something different. The engine was buried beneath upper armor. Armor removed, transmission partially disassembled, 1 or 2 days if all went well. And spare parts had to arrive from Berlin. The Sherman suspension, the bogey system, was bolted directly. A detail that seemed economically pragmatic was actually the genius of engineering. If suspension broke, you unbolted it and installed a new assembly in hours. No redesign, no special workshop, no waiting months for a replacement. Every American tank crew called the Sherman a Ronson burner. The legend claims, lights first time, every time, like the lighter. But this legend is false. When a Sherman burned, it was not from fuel. It was ammunition. A Sherman with a 75mm gun carried up to 100 rounds. Each round held over 2 kilograms of propellant, explosive material designed to burn quickly and completely. If one round ignited after penetration, the other 99 followed instantly. Chain reaction. Yet here is the critical fact: every tank in World War II burned this way. Verified data from 1946 shows early Shermans burned 60 to 80% when penetrated. Tigers burned at the same rate. Panthers the same. T-34s identical. But the Sherman was one of the few tanks redesigned to fix this problem. Early Shermans. No protection. 60 to 80% fire. Mid-war. Shermans. Side armor plates added. 40 to 50% fire. Late war Shermans with water jackets around ammunition. 10 to 12% fire. The final version of the Sherman burned less than any other tank in the war. A tired tanker, starving, roasted by heat inside a metal shell, does not fight as he should. The 88mm gun of the Tiger shot hot. The Tiger's interior was claustrophobic. Crews described hours inside as being trapped in a moving oven. The controls were poorly positioned. Escape routes barely existed. If hit, getting out meant scalding your hands on hot armor or waiting for the fuel to ignite. The Sherman had real space. Hatches you could open in seconds. Ventilation systems. Places to store hot coffee and rations. Seats that did not contort the body. In any film of tank operations, actors training on the Sherman took a few days. In the actual war of World War II, ordinary men drove it after basic instruction. Compare this to the Tiger, piloted exclusively by highly trained mechanics who invested months in specialist training. If your tank demands 6 months of advanced training and the enemy can operate it with a week's course, you have already lost the war. In 1944 and 1945, the Americans introduced the medium tank M26 Pershing. On paper, it was superior to the Sherman in every dimension. Thicker armor, 90mm gun against the Sherman's 75mm, lower profile, better power-to-weight ratio. Generals loved it. Engineers promoted it. It was the future. But here is what actually happened. In January 1945, the first 40 T-26 E-3S were delivered. Only 20 of the first 40 reached Europe. Most were lost in transit. In April 1945, the war in Europe ended. The problem nobody mentions. The M26 had a 500 horsepower engine powering 42 tons. That same engine powered the Sherman, which weighed 30 tons. The power-to-weight ratio was catastrophic on mountainous terrain. In Korea in 1950, when M26S faced T-34S in actual combat, the power deficit became obvious. Many crews preferred the upgraded Sherman M4A3E8 simply because it was more mobile. What exists is a logistical decision. Introducing a new tank 3 months before the war's end in Europe would have created impossible supply chaos. In 1946, the U.S. Army Ballistic Research Lab analyzed 30 direct tank-on-tank engagements from records of the 3rd and 4th Armored Divisions. Sherman versus Panther. Kill ratio of 3.6 to 1 favoring the Sherman. But context changes everything. A Fort Knox report based on 100 tank commanders shows 85% of armored combat involved tanks versus anti-tank guns. Only 15% was tanks versus tanks. The Sherman was not winning duels alone. It was winning battles through combined tactics. A Sherman did not fight a Panther alone. The Panther was slower, 45 kilometers per hour versus 48 for the Sherman. American tacticians knew this. The tactic: speed encirclement, artillery support fire, infantry with grenades, positioned anti-tank guns. The medium tank was the pivot point of a tactical network, not a gladiator in single combat. The Germans built tanks for frontal duels. The Americans built tanks for mobility within a coordinated squad. American press criticized the Sherman. In March 1945, General George S. Patton wrote a letter released to newspapers. While the Sherman would not prevail in a direct slugging match with a German Tiger, the great mobility of the M4 usually enables it to circumvent the slow and cumbersome Tigers and attack them from the rear rather than engage in a slugging match. But Patton also privately acknowledged limitations. Ordnance takes two. Goddamn long seeking perfection at the expense of fighting men. What does this mean? Patton understood the Sherman had tactical constraints, yet he defended it publicly because he knew it was the only option and that doubts would get crews killed. Another witness is Colonel Dmitry Loza, hero of the Soviet Union. Loza commanded Sherman tanks for the Red Army from 1943 to 1945. His testimony is crucial. The Sherman was held in good regard by many Soviet tank crews, with praise for its reliability, ease of maintenance, generally good firepower, and the auxiliary power unit that kept batteries charged without running the main engine, as was required on the T-34. Loza understood what the Germans never grasped. The Sherman was not meant to win duels. It was designed for tactical mobility. He drove Shermans through Ukraine, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, all the way to Vienna. He received the Hero of the Soviet Union title for commanding a Sherman company that captured a critical railroad junction in Austria in 1945. General Heinz Guderian, the father of Blitzkrieg, wrote almost nothing of contempt for the Sherman in his memoirs. He knew why. The problem was not the tank. It was the logistics supporting it. A Tiger could beat a Sherman in isolation, but it could not beat 5 Shermans backed by artillery, infantry, and coordinated tactics. And it could not do this 100 times because the next Tiger was 2 weeks away from Berlin. Consider what it took to build a new gun for the Sherman. Extract the metal, purify it, forge it precisely, assemble every component, pack it, transport to port, load on ship, cross the ocean, arrive in England, move south, load again for France, unload, load onto trucks, transport to frontline warehouses, and it is still not finished. You need mechanics to install it. You need truck drivers to transport the parts. You need logistics officers to coordinate. You need cooks to feed the mechanics. You need drivers for the supply trucks. It is an infinite cascade. Every new piece of equipment multiplies resource requirements exponentially. The Germans faced this problem. The logistical distance from factory to front was so vast that every tactical innovation became a logistical catastrophe. The Americans understood this reality. That is why they built the opposite of innovation: standardization. 49,000 identical Shermans, the same engine, the same suspensions, the same spare parts. American logistics did not need to innovate, it just needed to produce. Total production: Sherman 49,000 plus, Tiger 1,354, Panther 5,508. Comparative reliability: late war Sherman burned 10 to 12% when penetrated, the lowest of the entire war. Tigers burned frequently and broke down often. Panthers had similar issues. Crew casualties: Sherman had interior space allowing faster evacuation. Tigers had crews trapped more often with lower survival rates. Maintenance: a Sherman could have its engine removed in 2 or 3 hours with spare parts distributed globally. A Tiger required 1 or 2 days with limited parts available. When the war ended, the Sherman was still there. It was not a masterpiece. It was not the most feared. It was not the most beautiful. It was the tank that solved the impossible, fighting a war from the opposite side of the ocean, resupplying hundreds of thousands daily, every single day, for 3 years. The Tiger was a machine. The Sherman was a systemic solution. And still today, decades later, the lesson endures. True genius does not lie in pure complexity. It lies in solving impossible problems through simple design. The Americans understood this. The Germans did not. And the tank that was not supposed to exist, the Sherman, won.